Hey guys, this is Nevir and welcome to this video on how to play against 3-bets. So as we saw before, the population 3-bets way too tight, but we also saw that they call way too much against 3-bets, which doesn't make any sense, right? Everyone knows that they are too tight, their 3-betting range is way too strong, but still, everyone calls way too much. You're probably calling too much compared to GTO, which raises the question, how should we play against 3-bets, right? My first intuition was that I just need to overfold. Everyone is too tight, so I just have to fold and that will make a lot of money, which is 100% true. We're gonna have to fold a lot. But we also need to think about one more thing, which is how our opponent reacts when we decide to 4-bet. If the population plays poorly against 4-bets, then 4-betting might be even more plus EV than folding, even though they 3-bets way too tight. So stay with me guys, we're gonna have a lot of data to look at, but I'm not gonna talk about everything. If you want to pause the video and just look at every stats, you can. I will try to make it really simple, because I know it can be a bit boring, but we're gonna have to go through this data just so you actually know how the population plays, right? So now we're gonna see how to play against 4-bets. So we have the GTO stats for the NL50 GG Poker Rake. We have some stats against the nits. So the nits and the fish, they 3-bets less than 8.5%, and they can flat as well, which means that if they flat ace jack off, small blind against cutoff, then their small blind 3-betting range will be stronger, right? Because they don't have a 3-bet or fold strategy. Same for the button, they like to flat a lot against other positions from the button. But the regs, though, they 3-bet a bit more than 8.5%, and they don't flat. So we're gonna see how to play against the nits and the fish, and how to play against the regs. So let's talk about the GTO solution first. So let's take this stats, for example. First of all, we need to know how to read this table. So this situation, what does it mean? It means small blind opens, big blind 3-bets, small blind 4-bets, and now we have the stats of the big blind against the small blind 4-bets. So when the small blind 4-bets at equilibrium, the big blind should call 35. As you can see, it's call, fold, 5-bet. So the big blind should call 35, fold 44, and 5-bet jam. This is 100 big blind tip, by the way, so 5-bet jam, 21%. So we know what the GTO stat looks like. Now let's focus on the nits and the regs. So when the nits get 4-bets, big blind against small blind, they call 30%, so they call 5% less. They fold 4% more, and they 5-bet jam 1% more. Okay. And for the NL50 regs, we can see that they call 10% less than GTO, they fold 12% more, and they 5-bet jam 2% less. So we can clearly see that they deviate a lot from GTO, and they play really poorly against 4-bets. So we can already guess what's going to happen, right? When you get 3-bet blind versus blind against a reg, you're gonna have to 4-bet a lot. But against nits, might be closer than that because they are still pretty close to GTO. Now let's take another stat. Let's take button against small blind. So you open from the button, you get 3-bets by the small blind, you decide to 4-bet as the button against the small blind. So this is this stat. At equilibrium, the small blind should call 13%, fold 54, 5-bet jam 33%. This is the important stat, 33. Now, against the nits, they call 22, so they call too much. They fold close to GTO, but they 5-bet jam 11% less. So all the ace-4 suited, ace-5 suited, pocket nines, stuff like that should 5-bet jam at some frequencies, they are never gonna do it. And now for the NL50 regs, they call 6% more, they fold 6% more, and they 5-bet jam 12% less. So this is a big mistake. Now let's take one more example and then we're good for this. But you can already see where we're going, right? We can see that the NL50 regs, they play really bad against 4-bets. So we're gonna have to take advantage of that. Let's take cutoff against big blind, for example. So this is this one. The big blind should call 10%, fold 56, 5-bet jam 34. Again, this one is important. Against the nits, they call 37%, so they call 27% more. They fold 20% less, and they 5-bet jam 6% less. So we can see that they still call too much, but they don't overfold. And what does it mean? It means that big blind against cutoff, the nits 3-bet way too tight. Whereas, let's say, small blind against button, the nits still 3-bets wide enough so that they make a big mistake against 4-bets. But big blind against cutoff, they don't need to 3-bets wide and have bluffs because they are in the big blind. So they're going to 3-bet ace queen plus, jacks plus, and that's it. So when you 4-bet, it's not as effective, as you can see. They call way too much and they still 5-bet close to GTO at least. But now let's look at the NL50 regs that have more bluffs at least. So they still call too much. They call 12% more. They fold a bit less, and they 5-bet jam 8% less than GTO. So the regs still make more mistakes than the nits, just because the regs 3-bet more bluffs. So here we are on the pre-flop. So what I did is that I node-locked my opponent's reaction so that it doesn't look like GTO anymore, but it looks like the NL50 nits and the NL50 regs. So first, you're gonna see how to play against the nits. So let's say you open from the small blind, you get 3-bets by nits in the big blind. So they 3-bet around 10%, and they should be 3-betting around 17%. But then you want to know how they play against your 4-bet. So this is the big blind reaction to your 4-bets. They call 30%, they fold 47, and they 5-bet jam 22. And against this strategy from the big blind, this is how we should play as the small blind. We should call only 7%. So we're going to be really tight. We should fold 72. You're going to have to fold some ace-x suited, some king 10 suited, queen 10 suited, some broadways, and some suited connectors and pocket pairs. So we're going to have to be really tight. But we still have to 4-bet enough hands. I think at equilibrium it's close to 20. I think it's 21, 22, something like that. So you can see that you should still 4-bet some hands, and you're gonna have a 4-bet or fold strategy. You're not gonna call too much unless, you know, the ace queen suited, king queen suited. I guess this type of hands are pretty strong, but otherwise you just want to fold or 4-bet because they're not gonna play well against 4-bets. And now let's see how we should play against the NL50 regs. So we open from the small blind, we get 3-bet by the big blind, and you can see that the regs 3-bet around 18, which is pretty high. It's pretty close to GTO. And how they play against 4-bets, they only call 25, they fold 55, and they 5-bet 19. And as you can see, as the small blind, we should call 0%, we should fold 0%, and we should 4-bet 100%. Because they make such a big deviation from GTO, they make such a big mistake, they fold way too much, and they don't 5-bet jam enough, you should 4-bet 100%. So obviously you're not gonna 4-bet 100% of your range, but I think you should definitely 4-bet more than GTO. So GTO only 4-bet like 20%, you should try to 4-bet maybe 25, maybe 30%. Try to 4-bet more ace jack off, ace 10 off, king 10 off, king jack off, stuff like that. So maybe king 9 suited, queen 9, jack 9. Now the second stat we talked about was button against small blind. So let's see how the nits play. You open from the button, you get 3-bet by your nit, 3-bet 9%, it should be 3-betting 15. And when you 4-bet, they 5-bet jam 23, they fold 54, and they call 22. We saw that they make a huge mistake because they should be jamming 11% more, which is a huge deviation from GTO. And as you can see, as the button, we should now only call ace queen, we should not fold anything, and we should 4-bet everything. You should actually 4-bet close to 100% button against small blind. So I'm not saying you should 4-bet 100% because people are going to notice it at some point, but you can clearly see that you can increase your 4-betting frequency just because they make such a big mistake against 4-bets, even though they are really tight, they 3-bet really tight, but because they play so bad, you can have a 4-bet or 4 strategy. their 3-betting range is so strong, so you don't really want to call a king 10 suited, because when you call king 10 suited and you make a king on the flop, it's gonna be bad because it's gonna have ace king, but still they make such a huge deviation from GTO when you 4-bet them that you should have a high frequency 4-bet strategy. So I would say that you should try to have a 4-bet or fold strategy even in position, just because against the nits you don't really want to play post-flop. Now against the regs, this is really interesting. So the regs 3-bet close to GTO. As you can see, they 3-bet 15%. So they have a really high frequency 3-bet. And against that, when we 4-bet, we can see that they only jam 21%, they fold 60%, and they only call 19%. And against that, as you can expect, we call 0%, we fold 0%, and we 4-bet 100%. So you play against regs at NL5, NL10, NL50, and they 3-bet way too wide. You should just 4-bet everything. So my advice would be you open a bit tighter than GTO, and then when they 3-bet, you should try to punish them and 4-bet king 10 off, ace 2 suited, pocket 5s, whatever you want, jack 8 suited, but you should increase your 4-betting frequency. And now last example we talked about, and then I'm gonna make the conclusion. You open from the cutoff, you get 3-bet by the big blind, and this is a nit. This guy 3-bet 5%, and I think he should be like 8 or something. They 3-bet way too tight. But I think they don't jam enough. No, I think it's pretty close. They play pretty close to GTO just because they are way too tight when they 3-bet. And as you can see, as the cutoff, you should overfold. You only call 9%. I think you should call more than that at equilibrium, but you call only really strong hands. And you know, the suited connectors, because they play well against their 3-betting range, which is way too strong. And you just overfold. Cutoff against big blind, you fold ace jack suited and king queen suited. That's crazy, right? But you're gonna make a lot of money. Why is that? Because the big blind is so tight, right? So king queen suited is actually close to the bottom of their range when you think about it. So your calling hand, king queen suited, is losing against most of your opponent's 3-betting range because it's way too strong. So there is no shame folding king queen suited pre-flop, even in position against the big blind, just because the big blind is way too strong. And you should only 4-bet for value. Cutoff 4-bet 5%, it's kings plus and ace king. And I believe when your opponent 5-bet jam, you just fold ace king off. So yeah, you should definitely be really tight. Cutoff against big blind, against the nit. Now against the regs, you open from the cutoff, you get 3-bet by the regs in the big blind. It's 7.4%, it's a bit more. You 4-bet and they don't jam enough. I think they fold a bit too much. No, I think they don't fold enough, but they call too much. And now you can see that you can have some calls. You're gonna have to fold a lot of hands, but you're gonna have to 4-bet, even though it's cut off against big blind and the big blind is too strong. The regs still make a big mistake against 4-bets. So you can 4-bet everyone. Every time it's a reg, you can 4-bet from every position, just because they make such a big mistake. You can see you should 4-bet king, then king deuce suited. Again, I don't want you to 4-bet 47%, but you need to increase your 4-betting frequency by a lot, especially against the regs. Before I make the conclusion, guys, these two tables, I'm not gonna talk about it, but if you want to pause the video and take a look, go ahead. It's the stats that I found on Simple Preflop. Here I just put everything in the table. So let's say you're playing against a nit and you want to know which kind of stat you should have when you get 3-bets. You should try to only call 7%, fold a lot, and 4-bet 21. Let's say you get 3-bets by a reg button against small blind, you should, as we saw, 4-bet 100%. So you can take a look at everything, and now I'm gonna make the conclusion. So in conclusion, guys, yes, the population tends to under 3-bets, which means we should open wide. I didn't talk about that, but it's in the last video. We should open really wide and overfold against 3-bets. That's 100% true. You're gonna have to fold a lot. However, because they play so poorly against 4-bets in many spots that we talked about, and that you can spot here and here, if you just see the deviation from GTO, you can clearly spot where they deviate the most and where you're gonna have to 4-bet even more. because they play so poorly against 4-bets in many spots, 4-betting actually becomes more plus EV than folding. So they rarely 5-bet enough and often call too much, especially when out of position, which allow you to actually 4-bet really wide, and still you're gonna play in position. So you 4-bet your king 9 suited, you 4-bet your ace deuce suited, your ace 10 offsuit, which sucks, but you're gonna play in position, so it's better than nothing, right? So I think what you want to remember, guys, is that calling actually becomes the worst options of the three. You really don't want to call too much unless your opponent is really passive post-flop. If you know that when it doesn't make a top pair, when he has ace king, ace queen, and he's gonna check, then yes, you can actually call more, especially in position, because it's gonna be easy to play. But if you think that your opponent is decent and is gonna bluff enough, then calling is the worst option. And as we saw, the population plays actually really bad because they call way too much. So they pick the worst of the three options every time. They call way too much. They don't fold enough and they don't 4-bet enough. Whereas you should actually 4-bet or fold most of the time. Against the nits, you should overfold to 3-bet from all the positions, especially against the big blind. You should only 4-bet really wide in button against small blind and cut off against small blind and cut off against button. So it's really late position against the small blind and the button. Otherwise, you should fold everything from every position. And the regs 3-bets really wide and they play poorly against 4-bets. So you should 4-bet really wide from most position, especially the late position. So blind versus blind, button against small blind 3-bets, cut off against small blind, cut off against button, hijack against button, for example. All these positions, you should 4-bet or fold most of the time, just because they're going to make such a big deviation from GTO. They're going to overfold and under 5-bet a lot. So yeah, against the regs, you're going to make a lot of money just by 4-betting a lot. So yeah, guys, this is the end of this video. I hope you guys liked it. You guys probably make the mistake that you're calling too much against 3-bets, and now hopefully after this video you guys understand that you should actually 4-bet or fold. Bye bye, guys.